Joining us now is Joe Moreno. He's a former U.S. federal prosecutor who was appointed as a consultant to the FBI for agency's 9/11 Review Commission. Joe, always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, Deanna, good to be with you.
Look, in many ways, your work was parallel and taking place at the same time as some of the most important work that Robert Mueller did. Tell me, how did Robert Mueller's work change the Bureau and its mission over the years?
Well, Deanna, per your lead-in, right, he's FBI director just weeks before the September 11th attacks occur. And up to that point, the FBI was known largely to focus on financial crimes and organized crime prosecutions. It was a domestic law enforcement agency primarily. It had a counterintelligence and a counterterrorism function, but that was really secondary. Fast forward to the 9/11 attacks. Now, all of a sudden, the FBI's mission critically changes, right? It now becomes our primary counterterrorism organization in this country. And so you now have to really figure out the skill set, the training, the focus, the resources of the Bureau were pivoted in a very different way. And that really hasn't changed in 25 years. It is really now first and foremost an agency regarding national security. And Bob Mueller oversaw the Bureau during this time. Also, to your point, he served an additional 2 years over the standard 10-year term. And even though traditionally a Republican and appointed by a Republican, who was George W. Bush, his extension was under President Obama. So it really shows he's one of those rare public servants these days who had appealed to both parties because first and foremost, he put national security and America's mission over politics.
Joe, talk to me a little bit about the atmosphere or what it was like working at that time, and what kind of, what were the values that he brought to his work at the FBI?
So, Deanna, believe me, as a young prosecutor in the late 1990s, I would look at a career of Bob Mueller as the ideal Washington public service career, right? Volunteers to go to Vietnam as a United States Marine, starts as a line prosecutor, rises through the ranks over 2 decades to become the U.S. Attorney in San Francisco, then becomes the Assistant Attorney General at the Justice Department for the Criminal Division, largely seen as the third highest role in the entire department, then the FBI Director. And so here you look at this career and you say, my gosh, even though he's identified as a Republican, he was really seen as one of those public servants that was not political, that had appealed to both parties, that was focused on law enforcement and national security. And so you look at this as sort of the model which us young prosecutors here in Washington just idealized. And so his death is a tragedy, and it's really one to say there's not enough of that in Washington these days. It seems like everyone in any administration is so politicized and has no appeal to the other side.
I think you illustrated it so well, that he had this, unimpeachable work ethic and commitment to service, regardless of his politics or party. And the fact that he stayed under the Barack Obama administration for 2 years speaks to that. Now, this brings me to the president who came after Barack Obama, and of course, the investigation of Donald Trump and the possible role of Russian collusion in the 2016 Trump election. Talk to me a little bit about that job and what it was like for Mueller to take on that role.
Sure. So you're referring to what's been known as Crossfire Hurricane, right? Which was the investigation to look into whether the 2016 Trump campaign had ties to Russia in terms of influencing the presidential election. These special counsel jobs are tremendously difficult. Going back to the Watergate days, right? Oftentimes they go sideways. There's tremendous political pressure. There's everyone looking at the investigation. There's money, there's time, there's resources poured into it. So there's all of this pressure to come up with results. And so you have half the country very upset that 2 years into it, when it finally wrapped up, there were no charges or findings against the Donald Trump campaign itself. It did indict something like 36 people on all kinds of various other crimes that it found. But it left a very, again, sort of politically hot environment where neither side were fully happy. And this is actually really common. You go back to Ken Starr, looking at the Monica Lewinsky issue. You look at David Weiss looking into Hunter Biden. They're very, very politically charged. And so the fact that Mueller took this on as sort of the basically the twilight of his career, it showed that he had guts, and it showed that despite the pressure, he kept his head down, he did the work, and even though it wasn't popular, he got the job done.
And certainly the vitriol that Donald Trump had towards him that seems to persist to this day. Tell me a little bit about how you think his legacy is going to reverberate, especially in the very polarized political environment that you just alluded to, Joe.
Well, look, the Donald Trump comment is disgusting. I really wish our president wouldn't say things like that. You should never say that about anyone, despite the fact that you may or may not like them. I think that the Crossfire Hurricane, it wasn't a great cap to a career because, like I said, of the vitriol that it elicited and the fact that no one was really happy with the results. The reason Donald Trump is so upset is because he felt like it should have been wrapped up a lot sooner, once the investigation really found there was no connection to Russia. Bob Mueller, I think, would say otherwise. He would say, look, I go where the facts take me. And when I find things in the course of an investigation, even if I'm looking for something and I find other things, I cannot, as a prosecutor, ignore them. So like I said, 35 people were charged with crimes as a result of Crossfire Hurricane. And so I think his legacy will be one that he took on a tremendously difficult job at the end of his career. He did the job, and despite the vitriol and the incredibly tense situation, because remember, he was operating during the first Trump administration, so he had a very, very hostile occupant sitting in the White House controlling his Department of Justice. And so the fact that Mueller did all this under that pressure, I can't imagine very many people who would take on a job like that, much less do it with the class and the determination that he showed.
Joe, always great having you on the show. I wish we had you on a happier subject, but thank you so much sharing your thoughts and observations about Robert Mueller.
Likewise, Deanna. Thanks for having me.
That was U.S. former federal prosecutor Joe Moreno.